Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, Unleashing Growth Potential for Defense Contractors. In today's episode, we continue down the road of understanding CMMC, its regulations, and controls. Up next is IA.L2-3.5.8, Prohibit password reuse for a specified number of generations. We'll break down what this control means, why it matters, and how it impacts your organization's cybersecurity posture. We'll also provide practical insights and strategies for achieving compliance and securing your systems effectively. So whether you're a defense contractor aiming to win more contracts or simply someone interested in bolstering your cybersecurity knowledge, you're in the right place. Who let the dogs out? We're joined once again today by Mike Frieder, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMMC Professional Assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
And just before we started recording this podcast, it was you that let the dogs out of the room in which you're recording this.
And I almost said, who?
That would have been pretty funny. So, Mike, this week, or I should say 2 weeks ago, we talked about password complexity. This week, we're talking about prohibiting password reuse. So these two are very similar in nature. They're from the same control family. So let's jump right in. Why is this control important?
Well, as they say, a creature of habit is predictable. And 358, which is prohibit password reuse for a specified number of generations, is a control that is all about making sure that someone doesn't reset their password to the same password. Seems kind of silly at first, but let's be honest, we've all done it. We have our favorite super secret password, and we get told after 90, 120 days, hey, you got to change your password. And what do? You make it your other super secret password. And then you just switch back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the problem is that if someone is trying to run a brute force attack on you, or they've discovered your password somehow, packet sniffing attack, you name it. The problem is that if you continue to reuse the password over and over again, and it gets guessed, there's a longer range of time where they can break into your system and do nefarious things because, well, the password's always the same, or it's always switching between these two things. So, it's again another one of those controls where you almost think to yourself, why do we have to have this control? I think it's pretty close. I think it's like you almost don't need it. But the reality is that it is encouraging people to remember that there should be some number of generations, some number of net new passwords that have to come in rotation before you can repeat a password that has been used before. So, yes, it's annoying, but the reality is, from a security perspective, definitely a best practice.
We're all guilty of not only using the same password for everything, but when it is time to update, we're guilty of doing like password 1, password 2, password 3, password 4. But then probably the most irritating of all those is when you're typing in your password for a thing and it's like, oh, your password's incorrect. So then you reset your password and then you go to reset your password and you type in what you thought the password was and it's like, sorry, the password cannot be the same again. And you're like, but wait, you just told me it was incorrect. It happens all the time. Happens all the time.
Right. And
But
then you bounce back and
yeah.
forth because you like entered in one wrong password, and now your favorite password is torched and you can't use it anymore. And yeah, it happens.
Right. Or you try to keep from using the same password every time. So you have multiple passwords and you can't remember all of them. It's impossible. But what are the key assessment points that an assessor be looking for on this particular control?
Well, Roman, there's two primary assessment points. It's pretty simple control. Number one is determine if the number of generations during which a password cannot be reused is specified. So, in other words, somewhere in your documentation or settings, first off, it needs to be in both places, right? It needs to be documented, what it should be, and then you need to have it specified. Have you documented the number of generations that you cannot repeat a password? The number of times you change your password without being able to change it to what it was, let's say 12 times ago, 24 times ago. By the way, here's a hint. The default is 24 generations specified. So that's the default in Windows. We leave it there. That seems pretty good to us. Can't think of why it would need to be any more, really. Um, but yeah, we make it 24. And the second assessment objective is determine if the reuse of passwords is prohibited during the specified number of generations. Remember, you have to enable the policy. So the answer could be as simple as yes, it's been implemented via group policy, Intune policy, any number of policies, where you could be enforcing this. It's got to be enforced. So I think with that in mind, that's really it. It's a very simple control to comply with. The assessment points are not tough. The good thing is, certainly if you're in the Azure government, GCC high space, these things are in fact set up correctly out of the box. Generally speaking, you got to verify that. If you're, a local Windows network, you may have to just verify that the group policy settings are set accordingly. But yeah, pretty simple control, not really a whole lot to unpack there, but it is very important that your users can't just switch back and forth between two passwords. That would be bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what are the potential difficulties, if any, in enacting this one in an organization?
Yeah, the implementation I think is very easy. It's just a setting change. But I cannot count the number of times. I would probably say 80 to 90% of the time we come into a network and it's the first time we've been in the network, the sheer number of users who are set to never have their passwords expire is overwhelming. So I will tell you that nobody wants to change their password ever. I'll also tell you they have to. So I would actually say that interestingly, as simple as this control is, you get intense resistance on changing passwords. Look, if you work for any high security area of the government, you are changing passwords like every 30 to 90 days. If you're in private sector, you can certainly set it a little bit longer, but this is something that folks in the government are used to, and it's something that for some reason executives and people in private sector, generally speaking, get pretty grumpy about. They just really don't want to fool with having to memorize a bunch of passwords. It slows them down. It doesn't do any good. There's all kinds of excuses there, but I will tell you that, if I was an IT person, I would not ask for permission to implement this. I would just simply set it up, let my users deal with it. I doubt you're really going to get any complaints from help desk on this. But man, if you ask for permission to set this setting up on your network, I think, there is a pretty fair likelihood that you're going to get some pushback on people who just don't want to fool with passwords. They just don't want it to change. And again, by the way, this includes IT people as well. IT people are the worst, right? The cobbler's shoes are always in disrepair. You got to remember that, look, yeah, you're in IT. That doesn't give you the right to go and make unique group policy settings and password settings for you. There's a reason why these password settings are important, and you are the person who is holding some of the most sensitive accounts on the system. So you've got to remember, particularly if you're in IT, yep, you've got to follow this rule too.
All right, it's silly question time. This is a quick one. It's silly question time. But anyone who has been listening to this podcast for this long probably knows that I'm a fan of movies and television. Many of our silly questions are centered around that. Many of the ways that I throw the podcast to the musical intro is centered around those references. So, Mike, if compliance standards regenerated the same way that Doctor Who does, what would the next generation of CMMC look like?
Okay, so for me to adequately answer this, you've got to tell me about Doctor Who because I actually don't know a lot about Doctor Who, sadly. So what is this
I
regeneration that he does?
I know enough to know Doctor Who is a TV show that's been around for decades, since like 50s or 60s. And every once in a while, every little bit, the doctor quote unquote regenerates, which is just their excuse for a new actor to take over, similar to the way that James Bond has that. But in the case of James Bond, it's like, oh, it's a new actor, and we just don't talk about it. Like we just assume this is the same person for 60. Doctor Who, they actually make a point to for the doctor to regenerate. So it's a new person. So it's each time the doctor shows up, it's a new actor, but they're just like, oh, the doctor's regenerating, and now here's the doctor again. It's the same doctor, but it looks different, but they acknowledge it. So it's kind of like James Bond, but Doctor Who acknowledges it.
All right, I'll try it out. And so, what was the silly question again?
If compliance standards regenerated like Doctor Who, what would the next generation of CMMC look like?
Gosh.
I
Oof.
knew when I asked this question, I was like, this is gonna get him. I knew I was like, he's not gonna know Doctor Who. I
I
knew
mean, like,
it.
here's the deal. There's an easy answer, right? We had CMMC 1.0 where they tried to evolve NIST SP 800 R2. That didn't work. Then, um, then they had NIST revision 3, and the DoD came out and said, wait a minute, we're not going to go to revision 3. So like that didn't work either. And it will be very interesting to see if CMMC 3.0 doesn't go back to CMMC 1.0, which was NIST revision, 800-171 revision 2 evolved for defense specifically. That is a very interesting little conundrum. Because I am not sure that the defense industry is going to follow what is relevant in NIST SP 800-171 revision 3. When it quote unquote regenerates or kind of moves on to the next generation, I'll evolve it. I'll evolve the answer there. Um, it is going to be very interesting in my humble opinion. Um, it just is. I think it's going to be really interesting. Um, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I think that from my perspective, it is a very interesting question. I don't have the answer to that. Um, because there really are two different ways it could go. It could go back to the area where, DFARS and the DoD doesn't really want responsibility for creating its own standards. But then, they've got the Cyber AB that stood up. They'd have to really increase staffing. But we have NIST. That's the whole point. So I think it could go a lot of different interesting directions. But what's interesting is right now they're kind of frozen in indecision. I think revision 3 is very complicated. They've brought in this whole mess with supply chain management that, to be honest with you, that's really stretching for defense contractors. I mean, I've only met maybe one or two out of almost 1,000 defense contractors we work with. They really have a grip on supply chain management. And I still don't really think supply chain management is very practical. You can't control what another company does. Okay, fine. You find out the risks of dealing with a company. What are you going to do about it? I mean, all you can do is research alternative sourcing. So it's really hard, in my opinion. It's a tough subject. So I don't know the answer. It could go, in my opinion, one of two ways. One is they go back to the extra controls that were in CMMC 1.0. They say, look, Defense Industrial Base is ready. They got it. CMMC NIST SB 171 Revision 2, good to go. Let's go back to adding in those extra controls. Or they could say, no, we're going to follow the NIST SP 800-171 route. And I don't know. My guess would probably be they'll fall, they'll regenerate into revision 3, but I'm just not really sure, to be honest. Interesting question. This is a good one. Very, very good one.
I consider this a victory because even though you had an answer, I consider it a victory that I stumped you with the Doctor Who part of it, which secretly is always my goal with these silly questions, to get a good answer, but to also to stump you a little bit.
Yeah, you nailed it on this one, that's for sure.
And that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever-evolving world of defense. We'd like to thank Mike for joining us and talking about the very important topic of limiting password generation, but also teaching him a little something about Doctor Who. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman. It's good to be stumped once in a while.
But the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us via our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. If they haven't already, what should they do, Mike?
Well, they should like, subscribe, and definitely tell a friend in the defense industry. We're definitely putting out amazing content here. We can't wait to help you guys on your journey to compliance.
Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you know when new episodes like this one are released. We do also appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you thought-provoking episodes and high-quality content. Join us next time as we delve further into the dynamic world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.